These three people took the lives of members of their own respective families. Oh, hi there, stranger. Today I'm going to be telling you about 3 cases of family unaliving, so viewer discretion is advised. Being a particularly sensitive subject, if you do want to skip, as always, I totally understand, but if you're staying with me, then let's get to it. This is Patricia O'Connor, who in 2017 was a 61-year-old retired hospital worker, a loving mother and grandmother who enjoyed baking and gardening and had a love of art. Patricia was also a no-nonsense, straight-talking woman. According to her son, if you were wrong, she would tell you so, and if you needed a kick up the arse, she would give you one. Patricia was married to Gus and they lived in their family home. Also in the family home was their daughter Louise, who was in her 40s, with her partner Kieran Green and their 3 children, plus Louise's 2 children to her ex-partner Keith Johnston. Louise and Kieran, plus the 5 children, had recently moved into Gus and Patricia's home. So a household of 9 in a 4-bedroom house. Overcrowding is said to have been an issue in the build-up to the events in question. On the 29th of May 2017, Kieran Green took Patricia's life in the family bathroom of the home. The cause of her passing would later be determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. Around the time prosecutors believed this to have happened, Louise took all the children out to the park, returning a few hours later. Meanwhile, Green would transport Patricia to a cornfield where he would bury her in a shallow grave. Later that same evening, Stephanie O'Connor, Louise's daughter, would dress up as her own grandmother and leave the house with a suitcase, making it appear as though Patricia had left of her own accord. Both Louise and Stephanie would tell police later that that was indeed Patricia leaving the house after a family argument. Meanwhile, Kieran Green had gone with Keith Johnston, Louise's other baby father, to buy some power tools. Around the same time, Gus O'Connor, Patricia's husband, reported her missing to authorities, although he did already know that she was no longer alive. 2 days after the unaliving, Green would disinter Patricia's remains, separate them, and then leave the parts strewn throughout the Wicklow Mountains. They would be discovered by members of the public between the 10th and the 14th of June. Patricia was identified by dental records on the 13th of June. On the 12th of June, Green went voluntarily to Rathfarnham Garda Station and confessed to taking Patricia O'Connor's life. He said he acted alone in this and the disposing of the remains. Keith Johnston and Gus, Louise and Stephanie O'Connor were all also arrested for impeding the investigation. Gus O'Connor was the only one that pled guilty for reporting Patricia missing when he already knew that she was not alive. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Stephanie O'Connor, who was in her early 20s at the time, was also sentenced to 18 months. Louise O'Connor was sentenced to 2.5 years. Keith Johnston was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Kieran Green was given a life sentence, but I couldn't find a minimum term. From what I can gather, it's usually 12 years in Ireland before they can apply for parole. This is Lois and John McCulloch, whose lives were taken by their daughter. Virginia McCulloch took the lives of her elderly parents, John, 70, and Lois, 71, at their home in Great Baddow sometime during the summer of 2019. Virginia told extensive lies to keep family and friends away. She would tell doctors that her parents were away on lengthy trips abroad or holidays, and would then go on to use the pandemic to cover her tracks. So it wasn't until 4 years later that police began an investigation after the elderly couple's GP had contacted the County Council's safeguarding service, who in turn contacted police. A missing persons investigation was launched and later escalated to a investigation when Virginia lied to the police about her parents being away on a lengthy trip. When police arrived to the address, Virginia immediately admitted to taking both of her parents' lives and concealing their remains, and said to one officer, quote, "Cheer up, at least you've caught the bad guy." She had poisoned her father, but had taken her mother's life by striking her with a hammer and impaling her. The motive seems to have been financial. She had run up debts on her parents' credit cards and continued to spend their pensions once they were both deceased. On the 4th of June 2024, Virginia McCulloch admitted both counts and was sentenced to a minimum term of 36 years. She'll be eligible for parole at the age of 72. This is Elizabeth Van Plu, known to all as Anne. Anne was from Newark, Nottinghamshire, and in 2021 she was 77 years old. She had unfortunately developed some major health issues. She had reduced mobility and was very hard of hearing. Before her mobility issues, Anne was well known around her area and was described as bright and cheery. Anne did have family round her though, her son Mark Van Plu and his wife Karen. Karen was Anne's caregiver, but Karen was harbouring a dark secret. Unbeknownst to her husband, Karen was in a significant amount of debt and had been accessing her mother-in-law's bank account. In fact, Karen had spent nearly £27,000 over the course of some months before Anne's bank put a block on the account when there was just £105 remaining. And this was when Karen hatched her diabolical plan. You see, Karen knew that upon Anne's passing, her husband Mark would receive half of Anne's estate. And so on the evening of the 15th of December 2021, she slipped out of her house at just gone midnight and headed towards her own mother-in-law's house, evil in her soul. Once inside that house that she knew only too well, Karen set a fire and then made her escape. She went back to her own house at 1:15 before returning back to Anne's at around 1:25 and pretending to discover the fire before calling emergency services. She even went as far as breaking into the home to try to rescue Anne. Karen was initially arrested just 2 days later, but they had to let her go due to lack of evidence. CPS needed to be careful with this case. Anne was a smoker, and so they needed to determine that the fire had been intentionally set and not an accidental smoker's fire. Arson investigators determined that only an open flame applied directly to the bedsheet could have caused that fire, that Anne's smoking things had been left where she usually left them, and that she had extinguished them under the tap the way that she usually did. And so this fire was not accidental. Karen, for her part, she claimed that she had gone to Anne's that night the first time because Anne hadn't called her and she was worried. But when she arrived to Anne's, she didn't have the keys to Anne's house. And so she had to return back to her own house to collect the keys and then go back to Anne's, which was when she found the property ablaze. That sounds plausible, except for the fact that she kept Anne's door key on her own car key ring and she had driven there. Also, the first time that she'd just gone midnight, she had not parked in her usual spot, which was right outside Anne's house. She had parked some distance away. The case against Karen was built carefully and meticulously, and after a 4-week trial, she was found guilty for the unaliving of Anne Van Plu, an unaliving that was described as carefully planned and financially motivated. And so on the 20th of May 2024, 44-year-old Karen Van Plu was sentenced to a minimum term of 32 years. I will never understand how anybody could be as cruel as these people. As ever, please let me know what you think in the comments. And of course, if you've stayed with me up until now, then thanks for watching and I will see you for the next one.